Good evening. The infected blood scandal, today's inquiry, and not new revelations, but at last, after 40 years, at last, the truth. I asked, will anybody ever be held to account over this, or indeed the mistakes made during COVID? Ofcom launch a broadside against GB News. They say the People's Forum we organised with Rishi Sunak did not display due impartiality. We are not going to take this lying down. Ofcom have simply got this wrong. And last Thursday, I had a 99-year-old World War II veteran in the studio. We said we'd try and raise money to send veterans to Normandy on June the 6th. It's been a great success. I'll update you on that during the course of a show. But first, let's get the news with Aaron Armstrong.
A very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong. The Prime Minister has offered an unequivocal apology to victims of the infected blood scandal, describing it as a day of shame for the British state. The inquiry found a subtle, pervasive and chilling cover-up from those in positions of trust and power, including the deliberate destruction of documents by government officials. The final report concluded patients were knowingly exposed to unacceptable risks and the scandal could have been largely avoided. More than 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C over the period of 20 years because of contaminated blood products and transfusions.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. From the National Health Service to the civil service, to ministers in successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way. They failed the victims and their families, and they failed this country.
Well, the chair of the inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, found victims' suffering had been compounded by the slow pace of government compensation, and in waiting for the conclusion of the report, Rishi Sunak had perpetuated the injustice. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, also apologised, saying victims had been failed by all parties, including his.
I acknowledge that this suffering was caused by wrongdoing, delay and systemic failure across the board, compounded by institutional defensiveness. And as Sir Brian Langstaff makes clear in his report, any apology today must be accompanied by action.
And victims say they've been waiting decades to be heard.
Sometimes we felt like we were shouting into the wind during these 40 years. When we told people, they didn't believe us. They said this wouldn't happen in the UK. But today proves that it can happen in the UK, and it did happen in the UK. And I just feel validated and vindicated.
I think everybody today has read of the disasters that unfolded, and Sir Brian has been very thorough and has not minced his words.
This was systemic. This was by government, by civil servants and by healthcare professionals. I think that really rocks what we think of as society and really challenges the trust that we put in people to look after us, to do their best and protect us. None of that can we take for granted anymore.
Finally, Julian Assange can mount a fresh appeal against his extradition to the United States on charges of leaking military secrets. The WikiLeaks founder will now be able to challenge US assurances on how a trial there would be conducted and over the protection of his right to free speech. Mr Assange faces prosecution on espionage charges relating to the disclosure of information about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which the US argues endangered lives. Well, that's it for the moment. For the latest on all our stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts using the QR code on your screen, or our website has more details. Now, it's over to Nigel.
The infected blood inquiry reported today. Finally, and it really is finally, subtle, pervasive and chilling was the cover-up. That's how it's been described. And I have to say, you know, none of this is any dispute. We know that 30,000 people were infected with bad blood. We know that 3,000 people so far have died prematurely, directly as a result. I've been scratching my head over it because in 1987, after I'd been seriously ill with a blood-borne cancer, I was told that I should never, ever give blood, so I never did. And yet, whilst I was being given that piece of advice, it seems the NHS and others were buying in blood from America and other places, from high-risk groups like male prisoners. The whole thing beggars belief. But we knew 30 years ago that there was a problem, and we did nothing. You see, in Japan, everything concluded in 1996 with a financial settlement, with legal challenges, and with a full apology coming from the Japanese government. In France, it took a little bit longer. It was 1999. But there in France, not only was compensation given to victims, but actual prosecutions happened. And yet here in this country, nothing happens. Nothing happens within the NHS, nothing happens within the civil service, nothing happens within government. The odd backbencher asks a question here or there. And it seems to me, whether it's the postmasters or, frankly, whether it's the COVID inquiry, the one common denominator is that nobody is ever held to account. As a result of what we saw today, I've no doubt the government will, within the next 48 hours, offer some level of compensation. But will anybody actually face serious criminal charges? I wonder. We heard from some of the victims and their campaigners today in the inquiry, firstly from Clive Smith from the Haemophilia Society, and then from Jason Evans, who is the leader in a High Court claim that is going on at the moment. Have a listen to what they had to say.
I think many of the politicians should hang their heads in shame. I think for the first time we've seen people like Jeremy Hunt and other health secretaries speak up recently and actually start to acknowledge their part in this scandal, because no single person is responsible for this scandal. It's been the result of generations of denial, delay and cover-up. And whilst there might be an apology later today from the Prime Minister, it's not just the Prime Minister who holds responsibility and accountability for this. There are many others out there. And I would expect over the coming days and weeks for many more people to come forward and say sorry.
I think the apology on behalf of the state will be welcome, and I think something else the community would like to see is a proper apology from all of the pharmaceutical companies that manufactured Factor 8 and 9 products as well.
And one of the aspects that sadly the delay has caused is the fact that there are doctors out there who should have been prosecuted for manslaughter, gross negligence manslaughter. Doctors who were testing their patients for HIV without consent, not telling them about their infections, who then went on to sadly infect their partners, and they then went on to die. Those people should have been in the dock for gross negligence manslaughter.
Well, it is nothing less than a total and utter disgrace. And Rishi Sunak did today give an apology in the House of Commons, but you know what? He wasn't even born when most of this happened.
Today I want to speak directly to the victims and their families, some of whom are with us in the gallery. I want to make a wholehearted and unequivocal apology for this terrible injustice.
As I say, there isn't really much point in the Prime Minister apologising for what happened before. The question is, whether it's within the medical profession, whether it's within government, who will be held accountable? That is my question. I want you to give me some answers, please. Farage@gbnews.com. I think I know the answer. No one. Because there never are in this country. Sunak, later on in his speech, talked about moral failure. Well, that moral failure, I'm afraid, is all-pervasive in British institutions. Jason Evans, who you saw a moment ago, is director and founder of Factor 8. Jason, we just saw you in that clip a moment ago. For those that don't recall, just tell us quickly about Factor 8.
So this was a new pharmaceutical product that came out in the 70s, and it was made, unlike a regular blood transfusion, you receive one unit of blood from one volunteer donor on the NHS. This was made by mixing together tens of thousands of plasma donations from, as you say, the prison, inmates, other high-risk sources in the US, other countries as well, condensed down into a white powder, freeze-dried white powder. That's the Factor 8. And every single bottle of it was infected with hepatitis C throughout the 70s and 80s, and about a third with HIV. And
has anybody in the pharmaceutical industry been held to account?
Nobody, with the exception of Japan, where we saw that the Green Cross was one of the companies in Japan, where you did see accountability there. But in the West, in the US, here, no one, and we're talking about huge companies. The inquiry has named those companies: Bayer, Baxter, Revlon Healthcare, huge companies, and there has been no one had. And we were warned by US lawyers coming into this inquiry. They said, "You watch, you'll get a little bit of justice, but the people that made money off killing people, they won't be held to account."
Jason, I guess for you it's a fairly bittersweet day in a way. I mean, your father died when you were very young, directly as a result of this. You lost an uncle as well. So, I mean, your whole life has been, you know, radically upset and hurt by this. And yet, after all these years, and you've been there battling away, at least today you've had your day. You've dominated the news agenda completely all day. You've managed to put your case out, probably to many, many millions of people who were only vaguely aware that there was a problem. How do you feel at the end of a long day like this?
Well, I was 4 years old when my dad died of AIDS in '93, and so I was born into the fallout of this scandal. And for me personally, I've worked on this day and night for about 10 years now. And so to get to this point where finally we've got the truth and we've got some answers, it's extremely important beyond words. And we had specifically asked the government, I met with the Paymaster General John Glenn on the 2nd of May, and we specifically asked, please don't announce compensation today, because we want today to be about the truth and the facts.
Yeah, well, you've done that. You've done that very successfully. A lot of very emotional testimony. I suspect tomorrow's, by the way, very big public crowd outside all day. You know, people who weren't directly affected just felt they wanted to be there. I watched it at lunchtime. I couldn't quite believe, you know, what was going on. So you've done that. You've woken lots of people up. As I say, the press tomorrow will be full of many of the awful stories and the stories that are still happening, you know, today. Compensation of some kind is coming. You are, at the moment, the lead claimant in a High Court case. Where does this all go next? I mean, what is justice for you?
It's very difficult, isn't it? I mean, we had the apology from Rishi Sunak, detailed though it was. It's not from the person, the people responsible.
That's the point I made. Yeah.
And so I think ultimately, at this removal of time from what happened, an apology from the state, compensation, it's probably the closest we're ever going to get. Personally, I'm not seeing the criminal prosecutions. I hope I'm wrong. I'm just not seeing it. But the main form of closure, I think that I and the other families will get, is that tomorrow morning, for the first morning in decades, we get to wake up and know we no longer have to fight for the truth, at least.
Well, look, I wish you luck with it. A sum of up to £10 billion is being touted. Do you have any idea what they're going to offer?
I've heard that figure too. I've heard it's going to be funded through government borrowing, so it doesn't have to be scored in the budget. That was reported by the Times over the weekend. We're expecting tomorrow, when the Paymaster General comes with his compensation announcement, to hear the tariffs of compensation. So if you were infected with hepatitis C, X amount, HIV, X amount. Yeah. So tomorrow we should get those numbers.
And yet, money's one thing. It's not really enough, is it?
It certainly doesn't bring people back. It doesn't give people a new liver or anything like that. So, you know, it's difficult. But at the end of the day, people have financially lost an incredible amount. Yeah. And that, it's right that is restored.
Well, Jason, well done you.
Thank you.
You've stood up, you've fought, you've campaigned, taking on the British state and all the different sectors of the British state, the giant big pharma industry. It's a heck of a difficult thing to do, and you've done it very, very successfully. I congratulate you, and I'll bet you every single person watching this now does as well.
Thank you.
Good luck, and I hope it brings you some sort of closure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. There you go, folks. You see, it's not easy. In the end, some sort of justice does get done, but it's nowhere near enough. And why are we, over a quarter of a century, behind Germany, France and Japan? Something is very rotten at the heart of the British state, and I really do seriously mean that. Now, the Home Secretary says that protest groups, be it Just Stop Oil or someone like that, if they are putting, you know, out of business self-employed traders, delaying people getting to funerals or flights or whatever it may be, that compensation will come from those protest groups to the people who are victims of their actions. I wonder whether it's not a bit too late for all of this, whether now sort of protest of all kinds and even marching through the streets of London shouting terrorist slogans. I wonder whether perhaps we should have dealt with this some time ago. Will this latest pronouncement actually make any difference? Or is it just being said because we've got a general election coming up this year?
I'm Gloria Di Piero. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The fact that the King has not found time during the 3 days that his younger son has been in London to see him is a definite right royal flea in the ear for Prince Harry. And a lot of people around the country and around the world will be saying, and about time too. What Harry and his wife have said, either directly or through their amanuensis and fan, Omid Scobie, in his book, Endgame, it's been very, very bitter, very hard, very cruel allegations against not just the King and Queen Camilla, but Prince William and his wife, who, as we know, is being treated for the as yet undisclosed form of cancer. And that has gone home very, very firmly. Nothing could actually be worse in a family to have this division and bitterness and unkindness. And words have power, actions have consequences, and I think that's what we're seeing played out here. The division between the California couple in their hilltop Camelot and the British royal family getting on with the job is now very, very deep, and the divisions are stark, us to see, and between indeed the Spencer family and the Mountbatten Windsors.
Well, Karen Malone earlier was suggesting that people are starting to feel a bit more sorry for Harry and there's a bit more support towards him. Are you sensing anything like that?
Well, I tell you what, Nana, I thought it was great that he got a great cheer yesterday because people suddenly saw the happy Prince that we used to know.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I asked you, who will be held accountable? Well, John says, absolutely correct, Nigel. Nothing will be done about it. It's the way we do things in this country. Well, very sadly, John, I'm afraid. I think you're right. Mel says, and she's not wrong, this is why we need a change of government. Someone new who's going to clean the swamp. Well, is Keir Starmer going to clean the swamp? I'm not sure either of them actually are. Alan says, as per usual, nobody will be held accountable. Big money, big lawyers versus the little people, always the same outcome. Yeah, I'm afraid, folks, that is right. And it was interesting, wasn't it? You know, listening to Jason about, Big Pharma, the mixing up of thousands of different people's blood to make this powder. I mean, the whole thing's unbelievable, but nobody gets held to account. Well, one group of people who might now be held to account, yes, we're going to get tough. The government, the Home Secretary tells us we're going to get tough on Just Stop Oil. We're going to get tough on Extinction Rebellion. We're going to get tough on those groups who go out, close off roads, for example, don't just cause inconvenience, but actually, think of groups of people out there like the self-employed. I know that no one cares anymore about the 5.5 million self-employed and small traders, but I do. And if they're going about their day's work and they're disrupted for hours by people who are deeply concerned about carbon dioxide emissions, maybe they deserve some compensation from groups who seem to be extremely well funded. Paul Powsland, barrister from Garden Court Chambers, joins me again.
Good evening.
On the programme. Paul, I understand that people in Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil believe in their cause. I would love them to go and protest in Indonesia or India or the streets of Beijing. They wouldn't last very long if they did, because that's the cause. You know, if you're worried about CO2, that's where most of it's coming from. And we do allow protest in this country, peaceful protest. Some would argue in terms of the Palestinian marches every Saturday, perhaps sometimes too much. But some of these tactics are genuinely affecting the lives of innocent people, whether it's small traders, whether it's people on the M25 getting to a parent's funeral, or whatever it may be. There does come a point, doesn't there, where protest is unacceptable.
Yes, and that would be violence, but the disruption that Just Stop Oil and other groups have caused pales into insignificance when seen against the disruption that climate change is already causing to this country and will cause in the decades to come.
Well, that is a contested belief.
That's scientifically true.
It's a contested belief. You know, we've always had climate change. We know that. But even if we believe that CO2 without which we can't live, although some seem to think it's a pollutant, you know, the point is we are less than 1% of the world's CO2, and that number's going down.
We have some of the highest historical per capita emissions, and the point is...
No, we don't.
Yes,
oh, come on.
Yes, we do. We do.
Paul, China has produced... Hang on. China has produced more CO2 in the last 10 years than we've produced since we started off as a country.
And the point is that when I'm protesting, I can't go to the Chinese government because I'm not a citizen of China. I'm a citizen of Britain. Mm-hmm. This is my country. I'm proud to be British, and I think my government should stand up and do the right thing and protect our citizens from the clear danger that climate change
you know what?
causes.
If we all live in caves tomorrow, don't eat meat, don't travel to work, it'll make no difference.
Well,
Zero difference.
If all people around the world do that, it will make a difference. And
they won't. Do you know why? Because the vast majority of the world's population earn less than $3 a day. They want the things that we've got. They want cars, they want fridges, they want deep freezers, they want all these things. They want to become richer, and we're not going to stop it.
I think rather than a generalised debate about climate change, let's actually look at these proposals.
I'm looking at motivations. You know, this is what motivates you people, and I disagree with you. But your actions are unacceptable in a free society. I mean, people going in, damaging artworks. I mean, this is not acceptable behaviour.
I think when compared to the clear harm that climate change poses, it is, because what is going to damage more art over the coming century? It's going to be climate change. Floods.
Why?
Because of floods.
Oh, good Lord. Listen, you can believe in your apocalyptic vision if you want
it's already happening, Nigel. Have you heard about that? Have you spoken to farmers in this country? Talk about no food, farmers, no food.
What happened in the winter of 1836? It was a lot wetter than this year, you know, and it truly was. But your behaviour is unacceptable, and the Home Secretary finally says he's going to get tough, and to begin with, it's going to be compensation. Your groups are heavily funded by some very well-known people. Are you worried that all your money will be taken to pay compensation to those whose lives you damage?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Lord Warney, who produced this report, he's a paid lobbyist for fossil fuel firms and arms companies, and that's why he's come up with these proposals.
You mean he works for companies that provide jobs and make wealth?
However, you might be surprised that I actually think this proposal might actually be good for Just Stop Oil and other groups, because it will. At the moment, we've got this thing where it turns into a big news brouhaha around, isn't this awful? But actually, if people are forced to go through a legal process to get compensation from Just Stop Oil, they might actually sit and consider who is causing the disruption here. Is it these people standing up for their children and their grandchildren's future, or is it their government that is betraying them by not taking proper climate action?
How do you think any of this helps your cause? So, I mean, all you do is alienate a huge number of people. None of it is helping your cause. And generally, we can see the protesters are middle class, privately educated, with names like Jocasta and Benjamin.
Not true.
Oh, it certainly is.
I've been working class background.
Yeah, no, they're tying themselves to gantries on the M25 in their gap year, or whatever it may be. How are you helping your cause?
It can be seen that every single time climate protesters actually have a chance to be heard through our judicial system and have a chance for the evidence to actually be considered by ordinary people rather than it being put through a media lens. Ordinary people are actually sitting up and noticing maybe these people have a point, and that's why repeatedly climate activists are getting acquitted by juries, and juries are hearing they have a right to acquit defendants on their conscience.
I think juries are scared perhaps of the mob. Maybe that's what.
No, they're not at all. Juries have no risk of being attacked by a mob. That's ridiculous. They are acquitting people because they actually hear the evidence in court about climate change and realise that actually the far greater danger is not people bravely standing up to take action. The far greater danger is the inaction of our government.
This is just nonsense. We have reduced carbon dioxide emissions by more than any other Western government. We've done it by deindustrialising. We've done it by putting people out of work. We've done it by making the country poorer. We're nuts to have done what we've done, and you still complain.
We're not nuts. We should be.
You still complain. These acts of vandalism, people going into... there was an attack, a couple of old dears attacking one of the 4 remaining copies of the Magna Carta the other day. I mean, they should be in prison for the rest of their lives, shouldn't they?
It's interesting you talked earlier on about, private school Jocasta. Why? Let's talk about a female vicar in a Church of England vicar in her 80s. Why is it?
Clearly round the twist.
Why? No, she's not. She
should go to prison for the rest of her life.
I've read her book. She's a deeply heartfelt activist who understands that her moral duty in this time is to stand up. So where does this stop?
Do you burn down public buildings? Where does this stop? The logic of your argument, if you think it's acceptable for 2 old women to attack a copy of the Magna Carta, where does it stop?
They attacked the case the Magna Carta was in.
Well, they were hitting it with a hammer. Had the glass broken, it may well have damaged the document. Here they are. Look at this. Absolutely bonkers. I mean, they should be locked up for their own safety, frankly. They clearly can't look after themselves.
I think the question your viewers want to know is why does
this stop?
Why does a Church of England vicar in her 80s feel the need to stand up and do these actions?
Probably because she's lost her marbles.
No, it's not.
I'm asking you, if you find this acceptable, where is your limit?
Sorry?
Where is your limit on what's acceptable?
I personally don't do actions that are criminal.
Do you find that acceptable?
I think the far greater harm caused to our country is not from shattering a display case, but not from taking the actions that we need to take over climate change.
With that last sentence, I rest my case. I think you've made the case for me. But you see, that's the point, folks. We at Paul and I can come in, we can disagree, and we do disagree, genuinely, but we can do it in a pretty civilised manner, and we can say to you at home, we think you're big enough and ugly enough to make your own minds up. Maybe you think Paul's right, maybe you think I'm right. That's what we do. And yet, despite all of that, we're under attack again today from Ofcom. I'll tell you all about it in just a moment. Apparently, we don't show enough due impartiality. Really?
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A messy picture with the weather tomorrow. Most of us cloudier and cooler than today, but again, like today, there will be a few thunderstorms in place. We're between weather systems, but this area of low pressure is pushing up from the south and will generate a few more showers. We'll see the cloud thickening across East Anglia and the East Midlands with some showers here. The downpours we've seen across Northern Ireland, they will continue to fade through this evening, and many places will have a dry night. A bit misty and murky once more on these eastern coasts. Quite chilly across Scotland again. Temperatures down to about 3 to 5 degrees in rural spots, whereas in the south, many towns and cities staying in double figures. A cloudier day then on Tuesday, particularly over the Midlands, parts of northeast England and along the east coast of Scotland, especially Aberdeenshire up towards Orkney. Grey, misty and murky with that har sticking around, but a good part of Scotland actually starting sunny. Generally a dry start in Northern Ireland, but we are looking at some thunderstorms breaking out here later on. And we'll start with a lot of cloud over the Midlands, Northern England, and generally quite a drab day over central and eastern England. But some sunshine for Wales and southwest England. As the day goes on, increasing chance of again seeing some thunderstorms breaking out across Northern Ireland, but also southwestern parts of England. There's a Met Office warning in place. Wet weather will continue to affect parts of central and eastern England. A few scattered showers over the Highlands. Some brightness in western Scotland, but as I said, most places cloudier than today, and as a result, cooler. More cloud and rain then spill in from the east as we head into Wednesday. Could be a very soggy day over parts of eastern England and parts of Scotland. Some heavy downpours possible. And in the south, some brighter spells may well trigger some heavy showers as we go through the day. There'll be a bit more of a breeze coming in from the east, so a cool day here with some brightness further south. We could again get up to 20 Celsius. Bye for now.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Would you, Adam and Eva? Ofcom are after GB News yet again. Adam Cherry, GB News reporter, tells us more.
So, right, let's do the big picture stuff first, Nigel. So, People's Forum, the Prime Minister. This was an hour-long Q&A with the Prime Minister in February. 15 questions posed by members of the audience. That audience was not selected by GB News, nor were obviously Downing Street had no prior foresight of that either. It was selected by Survation, which is an independent polling company. So the questions and the audience we were going in blind here. The Ofcom have said that we have not demonstrated an appropriately wide range of significant viewpoints, and we're not given due weight in the People's Forum. The Prime Minister, nor was due impartiality preserved through clearly linked and timely programmes. As a result, we consider that the Prime Minister had a mostly uncontested platform to promote the policies and performance of his government in a period preceding a UK general election. Now, let's take a look at some of these questions in this supposedly uncontested platform. I think it'll be relevant. Take a look at this.
Why are you so adamant about Rwanda when public documentation shows it isn't working and that it's not going to work? So can you be open and honest with everybody today and tell us what the next steps are?
Social care is chronically underfunded and government has abdicated responsibility to local government, effectively making it a postcode lottery for many. Do you agree that it needs radical reform? And if so, what?
Why should LGBT people vote Conservative?
The UK is estimated to be short of over 1 million homes. But despite this, your party have scrapped the house building target and you've scrapped Michael Gove's proposed planning reforms that would have liberalised the building of houses.
Given the number of Conservative MPs not standing at the next general election and the number of factions within the party, there appears to be a lack of leadership at the head of the party. What are your plans to bring the factions together, to build a team and to stop voter defections to Reform and other parties?
Why are the people who are in charge, who told us all to do the right thing, have left us all to rot and left me and the thousands and the tens of thousands in this country to rot? Rishi Sunak, look me in the eye. When are you going to start to do the right thing?
So, a 40-page dossier released today by Ofcom explaining why they've ruled against GB News. I've flicked through it so that you don't have to, Nigel. Right. Ofcom acknowledges that the licensee's representations that the Prime Minister was not given an easy ride and that he was asked difficult and detailed questions about his party's record and policies, as we saw there. However, in Ofcom's view, the other, and I'm now quoting directly from that report, the other major political parties, and in particular the Labour Party, were likely to have had significant views and or positions on the approach to the policy priorities set out by Rishi Sunak. In other words, they're likely to disagree with the government because they're the opposition.
Really? Good Lord.
We did not consider that overall the questions asked by the audience represented such significant views, and GB News have not demonstrated that those were included in the programme. So that's where we are at the moment. It'll now go forward towards a sanction process.
Yeah, they're saying 60 days, they're going to report, and considerable sanctions will be thought about. Thank you very much indeed, Adam. And worth noting that in 2005, Tony Blair did the self-same thing on the BBC. No problem at all when it's Tony Blair doing it. No problem. There he is. You can see him on your screens. And that was absolutely fine and dandy, but is it because there is a lot of pressure being put on GB News? Broadcaster and former BBC current affairs producer John Mayer joins me live from Oxford. John, you know, as a channel that's relatively new, we have made some mistakes along the way. Hands up, and we admit that. I cannot for the life of me see what was wrong with that event with Rishi Sunak, given that we're inviting all the other party leaders to do the same thing.
Nigel, it's good to be back on the Tory party, the air again, and nice to see you again. Look, come on, guys, you've been on Ofcom's naughty step for a couple of years now. You've fallen off the naughty step. And so you say, oh, and you start yelling. Look, you've been invited to play a football game, and you come in, you played rugby, and you start to tackle people, and then you say, oh, no, it's the referee's fault. Let's have some VAR.
No, I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question. What was wrong with that People's Forum? He was asked extremely tough questions, some very personal questions too. What did we do wrong?
The promo you've just shown us, I mean, nothing, but I mean, it looked rather boring and some rather irate people, and poor old Rishi probably didn't handle it very well. Have you had a People's Forum for Keir Starmer? Have you had one for the Lib Dems? Have you had one for Reform?
Yes, they're all invited. They're all invited.
Have you had them yet, though? Have you had them yet?
No, the Prime Minister was the first. They are all invited to come and do exactly the same format, and I would have thought it was a very good, fair, open format with a genuinely neutral audience.
Where was the impartiality? What's due impartiality? Look, I helped to invent
I'm afraid we're going to have to kill that, guys.
If I put that programme, I'd be fired. I would be.
Would you?
The producer of that programme should be fired.
Right, we're very good. John, thank you. Enjoy your BBC pension, I'm sure you are. Well, there you are. Right, moving on quickly. We're now told that newly trained dentists might be forced to work for the NHS to try and tackle the dental deserts rather than going abroad. Good Lord. I've been talking about that now for over 10 years. Now, on Thursday evening, we had 99-year-old Dorothea Barron in the studio. Let's remind ourselves of the fire that she's still got.
I don't think there'd been a turning point. The turning point, of course, was going in.
Yeah, no remarkable
Going
stuff.
into France. Then we felt it.
We're on our way.
Yes, we're coming in, we're getting back. And we've driven you out. Well, we haven't let you come into England.
You've still got the fighting spirit, haven't you?
Oh, I sure. 99.
I love it. I love it.
As Johnny will tell
I know, I can tell. I wouldn't argue with you, I promise. Well, that was delightful. And we did it because Johnny Gallagher, entrepreneur and big supporter of veterans in this country, wanted to raise some money. He'd put his hand in his pocket many, many times before, but he wanted to raise some money, get public involvement to try to big up the significance of the 6th of June this year, the 80th anniversary of the Normandy landings, and indeed the last event at which significant numbers of people who took part in that contest or supported it in some way will be on this planet and able to get together. And we were trying to raise some money. Johnny joins me. Johnny, I put out a big Charlie appeal, and I understand that GB News viewers and listeners have responded.
Yeah, so we've hit our target, £100,000. So we've got 10 of the veterans back, who, by the way, were going to be sitting on their sofa watching.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and the good news, we've had a few good things that come from it. Two major things is, one, we've actually had more veterans that have come and said, you know, can we join? We didn't know this was a thing. So we've had over 3, nearly 4 veterans now come and tell us that they want to take part, and if there's any more money, so the cause is still there. But most importantly, these people feel that this country is not what they fought for. and they feel people have forgotten about them. And when you hear their stories and they sit down with me and they tell me what they fought for, some of them are scared to leave their house, OK, in case of getting stabbed or shot. I asked one of them to be on TV the other day, said, I don't leave my house at night time. This is not what they fought for. And by us coming together, and thousands of people supported this, I sat down with them and said, look how many people still care about you. And I mean, so that for me meant a lot. That meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to them. But it is really sad that that's how they feel.
No, it is very, very sad. But, you know, we will, those of us that still care, and I still think a majority of people do care, actually. I mean, I genuinely do. The fact we've helped you with your efforts to get 10 veterans that can go back, and it's not an easy thing with a 100-year-old person, is it? You've got to have carers, and there's a bit to organise.
Yeah, I mean, well, the London cab trade's amazing.
And they help enormously.
Well, that's the only way they can really get back, because they've got the ramps, they can take them to places. They do it for, you know, they help in their numbers, they come out, the black cabs, to help them. But yes, it's not easy. And we actually lost one of the veterans very recently who was meant to go on the trip.
Which I'm afraid is going to happen.
Yeah.
So we got 10 that you funded to go back.
So far,
and you now want to raise a bit more money, yeah?
I want to raise another 50,000.
Right.
So it's still there, the link, the donations, and I want to get more back.
OK, Johnny, well done, mate, and I'm pleased that we can help you. I really, really am. So, folks, you know, you've given very generously already, but there's a QR code you can find on your screen. I'll make sure that it's there for much of the rest of the programme. You can also Google thetaxicharity.org, and they're taking donations, and you've done so much for us. Thank you enormously to our viewers and listeners for helping. If you want to do more, we can send more World War II veterans to Normandy, which strikes me as being a very just cause. Now, I did say to you a couple of weeks ago that we would do a lot on this show in the run-up to June the 6th. And if you believe the Mail on Sunday, we only have one aeroplane capable of dropping parachutists in a reenactment of many of the parachute drops that took place the night leading into the dawn of June the 6th. In a minute, we'll debate. Was it right? Wasn't it? And is it because we've just slashed the armed forces so much in the last 14 years, we're not even capable of doing these things?
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Britain's Newsroom. Weekday mornings from 9:30.
So, a private members club in London, the Garrick Club, has voted to allow women members for the first time in its history.
So it's been around for 193 years. Women were not allowed as members, but they could go in as guests of male members. But there was a vote last night, 60% said time to allow women in on equal terms.
We don't really care about being part of a stuffy boys' club, and to join us to talk about this is Georgia Gilhooly. Good morning, Georgia. Do women care about this? Have The Guardian got nothing better to do?
Apparently not, considering we have a huge range of domestic and global crises ongoing at the moment. I think, first and foremost, this was a campaign. It's been successful now by and for elites. I believe the chief reporter at The Guardian who spearheaded this was Amelia Gentleman.
That's right.
And in the initial coverage, she didn't even mention that her father-in-law, I believe, Stanley Johnson, obviously the father of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, a very influential member of the Tory party. She didn't mention that he was a member, which I find bizarre. It's something that should have gone on that list if it was a list of influential members, which it was.
So hang on a minute, who's that?
Amelia Gentleman wrote the story in The Guardian. She's married to Joe Johnson, Boris's brother.
Boris's brother.
And so Stanley is a member of the Garrick, but she omitted that from her piece.
Ah. Yeah. And I think, you know, the majority of British women won't have even heard of the Garrick Club, nor any sort of private members' clubs in London. It's a very kind of elite inside thing.
It's actors, lawyers, writers.
Yeah, and I think they absolutely have their place, especially for networking with people in different careers or the same career as you. I think they have their place, holding charity events, that kind of thing, and conferences.
We already have members clubs mixed, and that stuff is still not happening. Just putting men and women together in this one space isn't going to help women in terms of cross-gender networking.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There were over 5,000 types of vessels involved in the D-Day operation. It seems almost impossible to believe. 150,000 men were landed on the beaches. But don't forget, a lot was happening up in the air. And we talked last week about the role that Coastal Command played, making sure U-boats couldn't get near the area. But just after midnight, through to about 3 o'clock in the morning, there were a whole series of parachute jumps that took place into Normandy, and of course gliders that went into, gliders with men, gliders with equipment, gliders with ammunition, gliders with vehicles. And it really was the most just totally extraordinary operation. Now, the Mail on Sunday ran a story that said it would not be possible for everybody that wanted to take place in a parachute jump to do so because we didn't have enough RAF vessels, ships, planes, because of the cuts that had happened and the fact that Hercules was no longer being used. It had been taken out of circulation. That's what the Mail on Sunday ran. And today we've had the Minister, Grant Shapps, saying this in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, weekend newspapers report D-Day celebrations are at risk from RAF cuts. And the latest MOD figures confirm nearly 50,000 full-time forces personnel have now been cut since 2010. The Defence Secretary's predecessor admitted this government has hollowed out and underfunded the forces. He's right, isn't he?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I very much appreciate his support for ongoing support for Ukraine, £3 billion a year. I do have to just gently say to him, it's not possible to provide that support unless you provide a route to getting there with the 2.5%, otherwise it will come out of the rest of the budget. And when it comes to that story that I too read over the weekend, it's simply not the case. We will have, in fact, I think it's 181 parachutists, exactly the same number as actually jumped in that location on D-Day.
Well, extraordinary stuff, and John Healey clearly putting him under enormous pressure there in the House of Commons. Labour getting the upper hand with the defence debate, whoever would have believed it. But that was better than Defence Minister James Cartledge, who extraordinarily said in the Commons earlier, the truth about the position in relation to D-Day is we will have 2 A400Ms, that's the aeroplanes, available for June the 5th, and 181 parachutists will be dropped. The number is there because that was the number of paratroopers who landed on D-Day and took the Pegasus Bridge. Mercifully, Marc Francois got up to explain that, in fact, the Pegasus Bridge was taken by the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry, who'd gone in by glider. This, folks, is the calibre of ministers we have today in the House of Commons. Well, let's try and find out what the truth of all this is, what the plans really were, and what the situation is. I'm joined by Paul Biddis, retired para and military advisor for film and TV. And Paul, I understand that you've taken part yourself in previous parachute drops to commemorate Normandy.
Yeah, that's correct. I was on the 50th anniversary of the D-Day landings, and we had a lot more than just the number explained by actually what dropped into by glider.
So
and
how
there was
many,
a lot more.
I'm going to say, how many people jumped, do you reckon, on the 50th?
On the 50th, I would say, there was representatives from all 3 battalions, 1, 2 and 3 para. There was 4 C-130s, which has 90 men jumping from each C-130. We also had the Americans, we had the Germans, we had every country jumping into that. But there was lots of other airborne operations that were operating on D-Day itself, and there was a lot more than what was described by the minister. I did chuckle when I heard that.
Well, yeah, whether one should laugh or cry, Paul, it's quite difficult to know these days. So is your sense of it that perhaps the newspaper story was right and that we just don't have the aeroplanes available?
Yeah, I mean, there's always been a problem with airframe availability because of operations. So when we had the J's, we were fighting two wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. We lost two C-130s, then that had an impact on the capability. Exercises, training, and anniversaries are always put as a low priority. However, if we recall what we saw in Russia only a few weeks ago, with their Armed Forces Day, they had one tank from World War II on display, which shows the problem with their capability. Now, if we cannot just show our capability on a simple anniversary, which is an hour's flight away from RAF Brides Norton, and we can only use one airframe, that's not a good demonstration of the UK's capability.
No, it absolutely isn't. Paul, I can tell you that on the 73rd anniversary of D-Day, I was with the Airborne Division at Ronville, which, of course, was the first village or town village to be liberated by British forces. And I kind of got the sense, and of course there were a lot more veterans around on that day than there will be this year, but I kind of got the sense, talking to people who had served and were still serving in the parachute regiment, that this place is very, very special to you guys, isn't it?
Exactly. It's not only is it a part of our history, this is what we are. This is how the airborne forces were born, and this is what we were bred into. But the ethos of the airborne forces, which also helps on to supplement special forces, which are also diminishing, is being diminished as we speak now. And this is just another example of diminishing our defence.
Paul, I'm afraid, sadly, I'd love to challenge you, but I'm afraid that you are right. Thank you for joining me on the programme. All a bit depressing. Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me in the studio. Obviously today has been absolutely dominated in every way by the inquiry into contaminated blood. And I was just musing earlier, Japan dealt with this in 1996, France and Germany dealt with it. Well, France back in 1999, Germany a touch later, done, over, prosecutions upheld in some places, not in others. Reasonably sensible compensation given to those who'd lost income or lost loved ones. We're a quarter of a century after them. What is wrong with us?
I don't know, and it's a deeper question than infected blood, because it's the same on all of these things.
Postmasters?
Absolutely. Hillsborough. Everything takes such a long time. I mean, I'm concerned it happens about a drug called Primados, which had an effect in the 1960s and 70s on babies. And still the government hasn't done anything about it. And so there are other ones there as well. And what really puzzles me is why ministers and civil servants want to cover up for people who have retired, have died. No one's blaming this government for mistakes that were made in the 1970s and 1980s. And yet it's still 7 years since Theresa May set up this inquiry. And we just need to get better at being honest with our voters about what is going on.
Rishi Sunak did talk about moral failure. And I think this moral failure runs deep through all of our institutions.
And arrogance. I mean, look, everyone likes Ken Clarke. He, as much as you, enjoys a pint.
Yeah.
But his response to this, when he was a minister, was just arrogant. It was, we can't be sure, and the judge in the reports had a go at him for this, the way he behaved then at the inquiry. He just didn't want to believe the state could possibly have got it wrong. And those of us who are in Parliament, in office, should always be thinking, is my constituent right? Have we got it wrong? And not the other way around.
I expect no better from COVID. I guess you're discussing this tonight, Jacob?
Actually, we're going to be talking about Ofcom. And
good.
Its most extraordinary decision to say that being quizzed by the British people isn't good enough.
No.
Only good enough if you're interviewed by a panjandrum.
Yeah, Quite extraordinary.
It's a most bizarre decision.
Yeah, it really is. I think it's pressure on them from the rest of the industry.
I think that's right. I think they've caved in to left-wing pressure.
Yeah, no, so do I. Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. That's it from me, Jacob, in a moment. First, let's have a look at the all-important weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A messy picture with the weather tomorrow. Most of us cloudier and cooler than today, but again, like today, there will be a few thunderstorms in place. We're between weather systems, but this area of low pressure is pushing up from the south and will generate a few more showers. We'll see the cloud thickening across East Anglia and the East Midlands with some showers here. The downpours we've seen across Northern Ireland, they will continue to fade through this evening, and many places will have a dry night. A bit misty and murky once more on these eastern coasts. Quite chilly across Scotland again. Temperatures down to about 3 to 5 degrees in rural spots, whereas in the south, many towns and cities staying in double figures. A cloudier day then on Tuesday, particularly over the Midlands, parts of northeast England and along the east coast of Scotland, especially Aberdeenshire up towards Orkney. Grey, misty and murky with that har sticking around, but a good part of Scotland actually starting sunny. Generally a dry start in Northern Ireland, but we are looking at some thunderstorms breaking out here later on. And we'll start with a lot of cloud over the Midlands, Northern England, and generally quite a drab day over central and eastern England. But some sunshine for Wales and southwest England. As the day goes on, increasing chance of again seeing some thunderstorms breaking out across Northern Ireland, but also southwestern parts of England. There's a Met Office warning in place. Wet weather will continue to affect parts of central and eastern England. A few scattered showers over the Highlands. Some brightness in western Scotland, but as I said, most places cloudier than today, and as a result cooler. More cloud and rain then spill in from the east as we head into Wednesday. Could be a very soggy day over parts of eastern England and parts of Scotland. Some heavy downpours possible, and in the south some brighter spells may well trigger some heavy